So I can guarantee you that at some point in your YouTube browsing career, you were hit with this ad right here for Gordon Ramsay's Masterclass. They must have spent some serious marketing money considering there's like 24 million views on this video and 100 comments. And the trailer is great, but I always did wonder if there was actual value in this course for a home cook like myself or any of you. So I decided to sign up for Masterclass and become a student of Gordon himself. And in this video, I'm gonna be giving you my full breakdown and honest review of this entire Gordon Ramsay Masterclass. All right, so section 1 is just Gordon sitting there chatting about his come up as a very young chef. So young Gordon Ramsay just peeling potatoes and onions, getting around in restaurants by chefs. A classic sort of European style journey that you hear about with those intense French culinary traditions. And I would say overall, it's nice to hear about Gordon's journey, but this did feel a little bit more like something you would see in a chef's table episode. Since this is a class, I would have liked a little bit more knowledge, like give us some information that could help us as young cooks or young chefs. And something else that would have been really nice for this section is just a little B-roll. I want to see a few pictures of young Gordon during this time, or some pictures of the chefs that he talked about that he worked for. I think a little bit of extra overlaid content here would have gone a long way to make this section just a little bit more entertaining in general. All right, so this next section, clearly we're in Gordon's beautiful home kitchen, and he starts this section off by explaining why he didn't want to do the course in one of his many restaurants and he wanted to do it at home.
Yes, this kitchen looks incredible, but f that for a moment. Don't get wrapped up with how things look.
Gordon Ramsay comes from a traditional food TV setting where you've got big productions, a lot of people on set. I guarantee there's 10 to 15 people on this set right here. And their job is to make everything just run absolutely to perfection. So I think just telling people to f it, don't think about any of this right now. We're just cooking at home, to me, is a little bit dishonest. And he spends the first half of this section talking about why he specifically designed the kitchen he's in, which I didn't really find that helpful.
I wanted space and openness with light, mountains, sunshine. I've got the kids' names on there.
And then the second part of this section is him going over essential kitchen gear, but he kind of just like flew by the classics. So to me, there wasn't that much valuable information. And again, a little bit of B-roll, like when he's mentioning, say, a paring knife.
This little baby, little paring knife.
Let's see that paring knife in action. I think that would have gone a long way. Also, I found it very funny that outside of all the essentials that he talks about, which are pretty standard, pots and pans, knives, cutting boards, he brings up 2 additional gadgets.
A blowtorch, little smoking gun if you want to show off for a dinner party. You want a salad of smoked eel to be finished and you just, get this incredible apple chip.
This I don't relate to as a home cook. There's so many additional gadgets that could be helpful, whereas I've used a blowtorch and a smoke gun maybe a combined like 5 times in my life. So he talked about the kitchen layout and the gear. Now he moves on to a section about vegetables, which is pretty much him just kind of ranting for like 15 minutes, which honestly I kind of like, because as cooks and chefs, over the years we all pick up different techniques and methods on ways to prepare vegetables. But for me, it's these little cooking tips that he slips in that I think are the biggest takeaways.
Every time I see a young cook peel a heirloom carrot or a baby carrot, that's the goodness. The goodness is in the skin. They just need to be lightly brushed. We should look at herbs almost like that spray of perfume that lights up the room.
And in section 4, we're moving on to cooking for the first time, and right away, I'm like, okay, this is the Gordon Ramsay that I'm used to. It almost throws you off a little bit to see him in that toned down state, just sitting there explaining things. I think Gordon has a very frantic energy, and it works very well when he's cooking and talking at the same time. And Gordon's teaching us how to make poached eggs in this section, which is fine. I rarely make poached eggs at home, but it's Gordon Ramsay. He wants to teach you those classic chef skills, and I do think it's good to know how to make a proper poached egg. And then he ramps things up a little bit by rendering some bacon fat, sauteing some mushrooms in there, adding a little butter. But right here is something I do disagree with. He takes this delicious mushroom fatty mixture and then he just drains it off onto a paper towel. Now right away I know he's throwing that in the trash, which for me is kind of forbidden in the kitchen. You've got a mushroom infused bacon in butter fat right there. Just pour that into a little side vessel. Take out a cup, or right here, I've got just extra fat. Pour it off and store it right on the counter. You will use that up in the next day or two. But of course, that's not how things always work in a restaurant setting, and I think you kind of see that come out in moments like this. But overall, great technique. I mean, obviously, this looks incredible.
That is a poached egg to die for.
Now we're moving on to a knife skill section, which probably isn't gonna help me because I have good knife skills and I know how to sharpen things and all of that. But I will say the beginning of this section, I think, is probably more scary for the standard student than inspiring to start cutting things.
If that board slides whilst we're cutting, you completely slice your finger off. If you're cutting a butternut squash and the board slips, bang. Off comes the finger.
I mean, how many fingers getting chopped off has this guy seen in his restaurant days? That's kind of terrifying, but restaurant kitchens are a lot more stressful than home kitchens. So I do think you are seeing a lot more injuries, and I think Gordon is kind of preparing people for that, which is certainly one way to go about it. Obviously, you want to be very careful when you're using a knife in the kitchen, especially when you're starting out. Now, overall, I think it's a very hard task to create a video or a section on knife skills because they are so based on feel. But I think the most important thing Gordon did is throw in those little tips that someone can easily take away and really remember moving forward.
Top and tail them. Take off the top, take off the tail. Push that aside. When you start chopping, keep your board clean. Start off the thin end and work your way up to the big end. Start off with your big end, it's much harder to control.
I personally didn't know to start a zucchini from the small end and work your way down to the big end, which makes perfect sense. And now every time I cut a squash or a zucchini, Gordon is gonna pop up in my head. So little skills in the course like this are so valuable. Now he picks a butternut squash to do a little demo on because it's an awkward veggie, which I think is a good idea. He goes from talking about cutting off the skin perfectly so you preserve all that inner flesh. But then he does something weird. He doesn't just chop it in half and take out the seeds that you would normally think would be the preparation for butternut squash. He leaves in the seeds, as you can see here, and slices off just a few pieces on the end. Now there's no way with this preparation right here that some squash isn't getting wasted. So that felt a little contradictory, unless I'm missing something. Comment in below if you think I've got something totally wrong here. So we started off with the poached egg. Now in this next section, we are moving on to scrambled eggs, or an elevated scrambled eggs, which does not surprise me in a Gordon Ramsay masterclass. When I think about Gordon's career, like at whole over the last decade or two, the first things that come into my mind are scrambled eggs, beef Wellington, and emotionally abusing people on camera.
Fuck off you fat useless sack of f***ing Yankee danky doodle shit.
But as he's going along on this recipe, I'm kind of into it. You know, it's his unique elevated scramble. And then the guy whips out sea urchins and white truffles. Look at this recipe list right here. 5 sea urchin tongues. I have never once cooked with a sea urchin in my entire life as a home cook. The chances of me going into my kitchen on like a Sunday morning and whipping up some scrambled eggs with sea urchins in them served like this are so rare. It's just never gonna happen. But I am interested in the actual technique just for scrambling the eggs. So I actually tried this same egg technique from Gordon many years ago, but I wanted to give it another shot where I actually follow along with this detailed tutorial, which was basically cracking a bunch of eggs into a cold pan with a little bit of butter and slowly bringing that pan up to temperature while constantly stirring the eggs while moving the pan off and on the heat so you don't overcook the eggs. And then at the very end, you hit the eggs with a little sour cream, some chives, and you season them. And to serve up these eggs, I had some pizza dough from the night before, so I just made a quick little seasoned flatbread, and I destroyed this entire serving. I think it was 5 eggs in one sitting. So it was very delicious, but it was also a reminder of why I haven't made this dish in like 4 or 5 years. It's super unique and very tasty, but also pretty damn intensive. And for me, there's plenty of other egg techniques that are much quicker that are gonna be a more go-to method at home. So this next section is funny because right away, you're just staring at like a massive fish. So you kind of know what's coming. You're gonna get a few sections in a row on protein. And this specific section is all about breaking down a whole chicken, which I think is vital for any home cook or chef. And there are a lot of different methods and techniques to go about breaking down a whole chicken. And I will say that Gordon's technique is the exact way that I do it myself. It's my favorite version. And I think this section, Gordon really shines. You can feel his passion section, you can feel his experience, which I think is so important. I mean, this guy has broken down a lot of birds, and you combine that with just great cinematography. You got the multicam, and you are gonna be picking up techniques. Because again, it's like knife skills. You gotta do it yourself, you gotta get in there, but he's got a lot of great tips in there, and I think there's just enough inspiration to at least get you started on that journey, which is the most important thing. So now we have our first big cooking section. It's 18 minutes long, and he's taking some pieces from that chicken breakdown and pulling together like a full-on main course. And he decided to go with the chicken breast, or supreme he calls it, which is the fancy French term for it. And he starts off by showing us a really interesting veggie preparation where he takes a bunch of herbs in a sheet pan and piles on these veggies, wraps it with tin foil, and throws it over the open flame to give it a little smoky, aromatic flavor, and then he throws it into the oven, which is a really cool method. I don't think many home cooks are gonna be taking their sheet pans and throwing them over the open flame, but I will say he blessed me with one of the best tips of this entire course right here.
Whenever you use tinfoil, shiny side up, dull side in. The dull side insulates the heat so much better.
Now he hits us with another very chefy technique for this chicken breast. It's the classic butter basting situation that you see with steaks. For me, I think it's cool to know this type of technique, but personally at home, I never do this. Like when I'm cooking chicken breast, I just want to sear it, get that crispy skin, and then perfectly cook it through on the inside so it's tender and juicy. But of course, we're getting a lot of Gordon's French culinary influence. It's just ingrained in that man's soul. And the final dish looks amazing. Like this is a great $35 to $40 entree at a restaurant. If you're looking to really impress for a dinner party or a date, could be a good option. Not something that I'm making very often, if ever, but really good techniques in general in this section. And we're moving on to seafood in this next section, and we knew it was coming. First thing he whips out is that massive fish from earlier, which is probably like a 30 or 40 pound king Alaskan salmon. And I'm kind of laughing to myself at this point, like, is that what I need to learn about right now? I know Gordon is passionate about this and he's prepared many of them, but that is the last thing I'm ever gonna buy at the fishmonger. But outside of that, I will say that Gordon's knowledge of seafood, I mean, this man could have been a marine biologist in another career.
You see this hook underneath the lip is where the salmon's burrowing in and out of the rocks and trying to feed. These things move throughout the sand and they open and close and they pulsate to get to the territories where they feed.
And this section is very similar to the veggie section where he's got a bunch of product in front of him and he's just kind of going for it. He's just spewing knowledge. And I think for someone who is new to seafood, even someone like me who cooks seafood, but I'm not cooking it as much as Gordon Ramsay was in his restaurants for many, many years, you're gonna get some good tips and knowledge on preparation, on buying seafood, on certain ideas on what to do with seafood. So good stuff here. You can really just feel his passion when it comes to preparing seafood. And next we have a little interstitial section here on Gordon's journey to becoming the master chef that we all know him as, the 3 Michelin just beast in the kitchen. And we are blessed with maybe the best line of the entire class.
I was like a dog with 9 dicks. I was ready to go.
It's kind of like Gordon has these different personalities that he can turn on for different situations. And I wish you would have turned that one on just a little bit more in this course. I think it would have added to the entertainment value a little bit, but I get it. We're getting teaching mode Gordon. So in this next section, we are breaking down that big old salmon. And you can tell, just like the whole chicken butchering, this is a man with experience of filleting fish. So you're gonna get some good skills, tips, and information in a section like this, but I would prefer if he was just doing this on something more relatable, like a smaller whole fish, something that I would buy at the store.
Before I could practice on salmon, literally, I had to go through thousands of mackerel.
I think that's most people watching this masterclass. We want to learn on a smaller fish as well and work our way up until we feel confident to buy a few $100 massive fish. So not super relatable, but you get the entertainment value. It's like one of those Bon App videos where, you know, some master is breaking down like a $10,000 tuna. Really cool to watch, never gonna do it. So in this next section, of course, it makes sense to make a salmon dish with one of those fillets that Gordon just broke down. And right when he's explaining the recipe, I'm like a little bit checked out already. I think there's 3 or 4 different types of seafood in this one dish, which to me again is like a $40, $50 main course at a restaurant. But at home, I'm cooking the salmon one night and I'm cooking the mussels or clams another night. But outside of the recipe, if you're new to cooking fish, you're getting great tips here on how to properly prepare like a little fillet of fish. But we do run into another technique that pisses me off a little bit. He takes these base aromatics, rough chops them up, steams them with the shellfish for like 1 minute until they're cooked through. And look at these beautiful steamed veggies right here, just kissed with that shellfish aroma. I understand if you're cooking veggies in like a stock for multiple hours, they're gonna lose most of their flavor. You can throw them out, you can compost them, whatever. But don't throw these out. Just use them in the soup. They're perfectly steamed, great texture, great flavor. That's not what Gordon does. He brings in all new veggies to create this soup, this minestrone that the salmon, the crispy salmon, sits on. So no wonder he calls this
$1 million broth.
Next, he moves on to homemade pasta, by hand that is. And at first I'm like, I would probably benefit more if he was teaching me how to do it in a food processor or a stand mixer. But as he got into it, I was starting to get really engaged. And the reason for that is Gordon lived in Italy at some point in his career. And he tells us how he used to beg these ladies making handmade pasta in restaurants to show him a thing or two. And they finally agreed. And you can tell this guy is very passionate about making pasta from scratch, like the traditional Italian style. And to me, I feel that passion, and you get hit with gems like this, little tips that are so great when you're making dough.
When you take your pulse, it's the same kind of texture that you're looking for on that pasta.
And then we move on to a section on rolling out that dough, and I think this is the first time in the entire course where Gordon kind of admits you're allowed to mess up.
Times where I've been thinking, shit, this thing's not working. It's a mess, it's not coming together. Stop, you take a step back and you breathe, and you go back in and you figure it out.
My philosophy on cooking is like messing up and just learning intuitively from your screw-ups in the kitchen. But Gordon generally, he takes a different approach to cooking.
That is disgusting.
Now, I know a lot of that is just the Gordon Ramsay show. That's the TV personality, but I do personally think this can scare people away from the kitchen sometimes. And when Gordon talks about making mistakes, not getting things perfect, I kind of let my guard down a little bit, and I find it more inspiring to maybe get in there and try it myself. And in this section, Gordon finally brings in the first guest of the show, which is his assistant to help him roll out pasta. And right away, he just starts tearing into this guy, like truly roasting him.
This is Justin, my assistant. He's got the best job in the world. He's the busiest and the most sought after individual on Tinder. They're hairy arms.
Can we focus on the pasta?
Well, you didn't tell me the arms are so hairy.
So the next dish is Gordon making one of his most popular signature dishes from his restaurants, which is a lobster ravioli. Another very fancy dish that you can learn some techniques, but something I most likely will not be making at home. And then finally, in the last section, you knew it was coming. Gordon encores with the beef Wellington, which is something that I've seen him make many times on his channels, and also other creators have like recreated the Gordon Ramsay beef Wellington. So I've seen this dish so many times. If I was gonna make it at this point, I would have, but it's just so complex. There's so many elements. Not something that I'm really interested in making at home. And that kind of sums up this whole course in general. Overall, there were some good takeaways. Like I learned a few skills and just interesting tips and techniques throughout the course, but all of the recipes from this course were things that weren't very relatable for me as a home cook. They were super high-end, fancy entrees and appetizers that you would find at his restaurants, which is fine, but it would have been, I think, helpful knowing that going into this course. And it's funny because the second course he produced for Masterclass, which I think came out recently, was called Gordon Ramsay Restaurant Dishes at Home or something like that, which is the marketing that I think would have helped me going into this course. That is very specific. That makes sense. I know what I'm signing up for, but I kind of had to learn that along the way in this course. So that is my full review. Let me know if you enjoyed this type of video. I would love to do another masterclass like a Thomas Keller and give you my full review. I think Gordon was the first, but now they've got some more chefs on there, so let me know.